There is no life after birth. Of course there is. Oh, really? Nobody's ever come back after birth to tell us what it's like. Well, I think there's a mother. Huh? A mother? I've never seen a mother. Therefore, obviously, there is no mother. Yeah, but sometimes when everything gets really quiet, I think I can hear her. Okay, before you decide I've finally started arguing with myself about life after death, those are twins, and they're having this conversation from inside the womb. For a second, it sounds like philosophy, but it's really just limited perspective. One of those babies is convinced the world he can see is the whole world. The other has this strange sense that there has to be something more. And suddenly, this very weird little conversation doesn't seem quite so weird. Those babies are having a perfectly intelligent argument based on the only world they've ever known. They're not stupid, they're just limited. And so are we. What if there are realities we can't see? Not because they aren't there, but because we don't have yet the capacity to see them. The baby isn't somewhere else looking for evidence of the mother. The baby exists inside a reality it cannot comprehend. The mother isn't absent. Those babies are surrounded by her. She's holding them, nourishing them, sustaining their lives, and they can't see her. And I wonder if, on some level, that first baby just simply knows, not because he can prove it, he senses something beyond what he can see. And I think human beings do that too. Sometimes there's a knowing before there's an explanation. And then our logical minds arrive and start explaining the knowing away. I get that. I like logic a lot, which can be a little inconvenient when you also believe in a supernatural God. I can sense something deeply and then turn right around and cross examine myself about it 6 ways to Sunday. It ain't easy being me. But the problem isn't logic. The problem is assuming logic has all the evidence. Because if the only evidence I'm willing to consider is what I can see from where I am, I can make a perfectly logical argument and still be completely wrong. Apparently, those babies and I are twins from another mother. Hi, I'm Susan Price Thompson, founder of I Can See You, where I help people move from chaos to clarity through biblical wisdom, discernment, and learning to recognize the Holy Spirit in everyday life. And that's what these weekly conversations are all about. I've been thinking about how quickly I interpret what's happening around me. Something goes wrong and I start doomsday scrolling in my mind. Well, that didn't work, so obviously this isn't going to work. And if that doesn't work, then there goes the whole plan. Pretty soon we'll lose everything. The electricity and heat will be cut off, and we'll be sitting in the living room in ski parkas eating what we call Vienna weenies and s'mores over sterno cans, which actually happened, but I digress. Apparently, I wasn't entirely irrational back then. I was just prematurely interpreting the ending. Because here's the thing, sometimes the worst case scenario happens. I know. That's not exactly as comforting as I intended it to be, but that's actually the point. I knew what I could see. I didn't necessarily know what it meant. Go back to those babies. All they've ever known is the womb, warm, dark, contained. Everything they need is provided. And then one day, everything changes. Their whole world starts pushing them out. If they can interpret their circumstances, they might think something has gone terribly wrong. Oh, we're losing our home. This must be the end of us. Talk about throwing out the proverbial babies with the bathwater. And really, it would look more like an ending. From inside the womb, it would look like their whole world was being yanked out from under them. Everything that had held them, fed them, protected them, gone. They aren't being asked to give up one thing. They're being forced out of everything they've ever known, apparently into nothingness. Except it isn't nothingness, it's everything. They aren't being pushed out of life, they're being born into a life they didn't have the capacity to imagine. The circumstances are contractions. What is actually happening is birth. From inside the womb, birth might look like death. From outside the womb, everybody's waiting to say hello. And I wonder how many times have I called something the wrong thing because I was naming it from inside the womb? An ending, a failure, a rejection, a delay, a loss. I could see what was happening. I just couldn't see the whole story. Faith doesn't mean pretending circumstances aren't real. The womb was real. It just wasn't the whole world. The diagnosis is real. The empty chair is real. The relationship that fell apart is real. The unanswered prayer is real. This moment is real. It's just not the whole story. We can only see from here, and here has walls. Faith says, I know there are walls, I just don't believe reality ends at them. Mystery and truth aren't opposites. Sometimes mystery is simply truth bigger than our current ability to comprehend it. The disciples knew something about that. They watched Jesus die. If you'd stood at the foot of the cross on Friday and interpreted God entirely by what you could see, you would have gotten the story completely wrong. What they could see was crucifixion. What they couldn't yet see was redemption. So, what if? What if what I can see isn't all there is to see? What if the thing I've already named an ending isn't the whole story? What if the space between what I can see and what God can see is exactly where hope lives? Paul says in Romans 8:24 and 25, hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. That is faith. Of course, if I could already see it, I wouldn't need faith or hope. Hope exists precisely because I can't see what comes next. And I know what it feels like when the rug isn't just pulled out from under one part of your life. It feels like the whole thing is going down for the count. There was a season when our finances collapsed, my marriage was in trouble, my family was hurting, my health had failed, and we lost our home. So when I tell you circumstances can look like your entire world is disappearing, I'm not speaking theoretically. Some of the things I was afraid of actually did happen. What I was wrong about was what they meant. If you had handed me all the evidence then and said, Susan, what does this mean? I could have built a pretty logical case that my life was really falling apart. And some of it was. I'm not going to look backward now and put a pretty bow on devastation. Those circumstances were real. Some things were eventually restored. Some things could never be restored in the way I wanted. But I know something now that I couldn't know from inside it. It wasn't all for naught. I could see what was being lost. I could not see what God would redeem, what He would rebuild, or who I would become on the other side of it. I thought I was looking at the whole story because it was the whole world I could see. It just wasn't the whole world. And that's why hope means something different to me now. Hope doesn't mean everything turns out the way I want it to. It doesn't. Hope allows me to trust God when I cannot see what comes next. And when circumstances stop making sense, I want God to explain Himself. But sometimes I don't get an explanation. So I'm left with a much harder question. Do I trust who God is when I don't understand what He's doing? I can stay close and remember what I know about His character, even when I don't understand what He's doing. And you may already have a name for whatever you're looking at: failure, rejection, too late, too early, over, never going to happen. And then that little self talker voice pipes up. Well, of course you failed. You always do that. See, you knew this wasn't going to work out. Who did you think you were? Or, as they say in Texas, maybe you're just all hat and no cattle, whatever that means. We can build a pretty convincing case against ourselves with evidence we collected while standing inside the womb. We do like to label things before God is finished with them. Or maybe what you're facing feels bigger than that. Maybe so much is changing that it feels as though the whole world you knew is disappearing. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that means God is about to replace everything you lost with something better. I don't know what God is doing with your circumstances, and neither do you. But what you can see today is not necessarily the whole story. So the prayer doesn't have to be, God, make this make sense. It can simply be, God, help me trust you when I can only see from inside the womb. Second Corinthians 5:7 says, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." And faith doesn't mean closing our eyes, it means remembering that God's are open. If someone came to mind while we're talking today, send this to them. And if you'd like to keep having these conversations with me, be sure to subscribe and stay with me. We're learning to see together. Meanwhile, I wish you could see what God sees when He looks at you. But until you do, I can see you. And I'll see you next time.